Thank you very much, Carly, and we'll start out by saying thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm going to introduce myself first and tell you how I know Leslie, and then I'm going to ask Leslie to introduce herself. And just as a note to everybody, there isn't a slide presentation for this webinar. Leslie and I are going to have an interview, so I'm going to interview Leslie and ask her some questions. If you have questions, please type them into the chat, and then we will take breaks along the way. We really would like this to be a discussion, so we will take your questions as they arise, and we will have a fabulous conversation because we want to make sure that we actually help all of you with the questions that you have. So just a quick introduction to me. My name is Karyn Ross, and I am coming to you from lovely Naperville, Illinois, 35 miles west of Chicago. And I am an author, a speaker, a coach, a consultant. I've published 5 books: Toyota Way to Service Excellence, How to Coach for Creativity and Service Excellence. So I teach people all over the world how to create better, more effective, efficient, and human ways to work. And my mission is help people improve the world. And I also have a foundation for kindness called the Love and Kindness Project Foundation, of which Leslie helps me out as well. A long time ago, when I was learning Lean in 2010, I worked for a fabulous payroll company, and I did my best to help make things better. And I started to teach myself Lean, and I was struggling along and working hard, and one day I got a fabulous email from someone at the corporate office, and the email said, "You're trying to do what? Where?" And the email happened to come to me from Leslie Henckler, who was the head of the process improvement department, and through many years, Leslie became my first Lean teacher, and absolutely the best leader I have ever met, and a fabulous introverted person. So when Carly and Tanya asked me about doing a webinar on introverted leadership, all I kept thinking was I have to ask Leslie to come along and be on this webinar because she's the best leader I know, and she's a wonderful person, and I think there's a ton, all of us, including us extroverted people, can learn from her, because I've learned a ton in the past 10 years. So now, Leslie, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Sure. So I'm Leslie Henckler. Good to meet you all today. I started out a long, long time ago at Eastman Kodak Company, right out of college. I had a very useless degree in recreation and a need for employment, and I ended up at Eastman Kodak as a process control apprentice. So I started out doing work on manufacturing floors, doing pneumatic and electrical engineering work for the machines there. I grew through that whole time. I was there quite a while, had many, many wonderful, wonderful opportunities there. And as they started to bring Six Sigma into Kodak, so it was even pre-Lean, I did the Six Sigma training with some allied signal trainers, and had the opportunity to do pretty significant project improvements using statistics to drive good performance on the machines. But even then I was doing that work with people as well as work. So the project at the time was to look at the variation across the processes that were created by people coming in and setting the machines up to run the way they liked them to versus the way that they had been running just fine. So it was quite an adventure. But then they brought lean manufacturing into Kodak, and I worked on that all over the world for Kodak in manufacturing and back offices for about 10 years. And then I left and went to the payroll company that Karyn was talking about, because I wanted a chance to run my own organization and a chance to drive it in business operations versus manufacturing. It was pretty early on in lean transforming back office processes. And I have been doing that for many years now as well. So that's pretty much the short version of a long work history and how I got introduced to doing lean manufacturing.
Well, and what's your title now, Leslie?
Oh, I'm the Director of Process Services at a company called TriNet. That's a payroll and outsourcing company.
Cool, thank you.
You
So
are welcome.
before we talk about leadership and introverted leadership, I want to tell you all a story about my daughter. And I was just telling Leslie and Carly before this that my lovely daughter, who's just turned 24, just graduated with her master's degree in social work. And this was last week, and she has 2 job interviews this week. So she's very excited about that. But when she was in 1st grade, a long time ago already, I got a call from her teacher. And her teacher was calling to ask me if she could send my daughter to the social worker. And the reason she wanted my daughter to go and see the social worker, she said, well, you know, she obviously knows the answers to the questions and she's very smart, but she's not pushing herself forward. When she knows the answer, she doesn't raise her hand and go, ooh, 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 call on me first, call on me first. She sits there very quietly, and she just seems so introverted that we're worried that if she doesn't become more extroverted, how is she going to be a leader when she's older? And I really thought about this, and I thought, well, first of all, I don't think that there's any problem because we're extroverts, we're introverts. Whatever it is, she's going to be fine. So I actually told the teacher that she couldn't go to the social worker. And the teacher was actually very surprised because I didn't think it was going to be a problem one way or the other. And of course, she's 24 now and perfectly fine. But I think it really showed me, even at that time, the preference that we tend to have, and we tend to think that extroversion is a prerequisite for leadership, which I actually, even though I am an extrovert, I don't actually think that's so. So one of the things that I thought we could start out with just was the general discussion, Leslie, with what do you think good leadership looks like?
So, Karyn, I've had the opportunity to work for some phenomenal leaders, and I've had the opportunity to work for some horrific leaders. And from both of those things, you learn many things, right, as you shape your own leadership style. But honestly, the thing that I most value in a leader, and I try and model myself, is really caring about people. Caring about the people you work with, the people you work for, caring about your customers, and caring about the business. But if you put people first, I find that you'll make good leader decisions. The other things I think about are the ideas about being compassionate, about being approachable, and about being engaging. I make a very strong effort, even as an introvert, to reach out to the people on my team routinely, whether it's just a quick chat in Teams to say hi, ask about the dog, ask about their kids, ask about their husband or their wife. And I truly care about the answer. It's not a thing to do, but it's a way for me to do it. And by being able to just drop that in when I think of it and use chat or I don't necessarily have to get connected up into a 30-minute phone call, but I get an opportunity to reach out. And I find that resonates with me. And it's a behavior I learned from others that I try and model.
Cool. Anything else?
Well, I think being able to make the tough call when you have to, and not being afraid to make that, whether it's not like relative, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I think the key components of being a good leader, how they show up for you might look different based on your outward style, but caring about people, making tough decisions, doing the right thing, taking care of customers, those are what I most respect in good leaders.
Cool, and I actually really love that you say that, because none of those have anything to do with what our personality or our way of processing the world is, right?
Absolutely.
They're qualities, compassion, caring, being able to make a tough decision that really, whatever our natural innate way of processing is, we can use that to improve and do those things. So now, of course, I have another question about characteristics, because as you can all hear, I am just like totally the extrovert on the other end. So what characteristics do you have that you would say make you an introvert. How would people know whether they're an extrovert or an introvert to start with?
Well, you know, in the beginning of learning about this, I was a little curious. And I had a good friend that worked in the talent org over at our other company that we worked together in. And he explained it to me once as an extrovert gets their recharging from being with a whole bunch of other people. And an introvert gets their recharge or their time to like heal and be themselves by being alone or being quiet. And I think that really helped me, because it's not about whether you speak a lot. People say to me, how can you possibly be an introvert? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with how much I put myself out there or I talk to people, but it's about how I get recharged and relaxed. So that's one thing. But I don't know if any of you noticed when we first came on, I was sitting here quietly and Karyn was gesturing and talking and waving. And so you see outward manifestations that give you clues sometimes to people are an introvert versus an extrovert. I am one, you could put me in a room with 100 people, and if I didn't know anybody, I might not talk to anybody. But I would talk to anybody that came up to me. And so it's sometimes about how you show up. Right? And those are all things, once you know them about yourself, you can work on them. I work on them, right? I work on going to social gatherings like networking events and making sure that I reach out and talk to a couple people, because I need to do that, you know, to help, you know, broaden my own skills and comfort level with folks. But as an introvert, I really will be the person in the corner with a book, quite happy in a room with 100 people.
And Leslie and I have known each other for 10 years, and through this whole journey, not only is she the best leader I know, but she's become one of my best friends. So you can imagine the two of us together going places and doing things together too, right? So introverts get energy in a different way, and we might see them show up in crowds of people. And of course, in organizations, we have crowds of people, right? So we might see them show up in those different ways. What do you think the biggest difference, Leslie, from your, you know, being a leader yourself and having worked with so many leaders over the years, what do you think the biggest difference between being an extroverted leader and an introverted leader are?
I think if you look at some of the basics of what differentiates in general, right? Complete generalizations of introverts from extroverts. Introverts will tend to listen and process and then respond. Extroverts like to talk things through. And you'll actually hear those words in people, right? There, you get together and you've got a problem you're trying to solve, and a portion of people are like, let's just talk about it. And they're like, well, what about this, or what about that, or what about this, or what about that? And introverts like, make them stop. So you'll see that show up differently. But what I find is that if you get good at saying, hey, give me just a minute to think on that, or let me reflect back what I think you guys are all saying and see if I've got the key kind of tenets, it lets people have a chance to process. It lets people who are more about quiet thinking before they interject. Because again, it's not, you may come up with the exact same answer in the exact amount of time. It's your own preference of style of how you get to that place where you have the idea and what you need to give yourself space to think. Extroverts tend to need to talk it through.
So lastly, what do you do when all the extroverts are talking it through and the level of the noise in the room is going on? What do you
Well, again, it always depends. It depends on the circumstance. But a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start to take notes personally. That lets me take all the dynamics of the various voices in the room and try and pull out salient points that people are making. The process of listening, hearing, and writing it down lets me run through my own internal thought process. And then I'll ask if I'll interject back in and say, hey gang, let me see if I've got these key thoughts together. What that does is it drops the noise in the room a little bit from everybody participating, right? So they've had their chance. It drops the noise a little bit, gives a thought put forth, and then let's think about that. Did I miss anything? So I'll try and use words or put gaps in time to allow folks that need that processing time to have a little bit of that.
Cool. So thinking back to my experience with the teacher, thinking that, you know, the way we are going to recognize a leader is someone's going to be raising their hand, going ooh, 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 and pushing themselves out to the front. If you're in this situation and you're in a group of leaders and you're processing in a quiet way, do you think that people find that's reserved or aloof, or they don't recognize that as leadership?
I think they might find it as reserved. I don't believe they would find it as aloof. I don't tend to, but you know, you judge from your own place. And I personally find that if you were to go back maybe 15 years ago, that might have been the case, that people who were less outward or less vocal, less boisterous, were not viewed as leaders. I think companies are starting to recognize and embrace that leadership comes in all forms, whether it's formal leadership, peer leadership, right? Introverted leadership, extroverted leadership. It's about having the mix and the variety, and then understanding and being respectful of what different people need so that everybody gets their voice in the room. And I think they're starting to recognize, or continuing to recognize even more so, that those are all attributes of great leaders.
Cool. So do you think, or how do you think, being an introvert has affected your ability to lead at various different levels of the organization? Because I know that, you know, through the years you've risen up through the ranks and now you're at an extremely high level of the organization.
I think, I believe I have to force myself to modify my style sometimes, right, in order to get my voice in there. But I also think that people that are extroverts, to be recognized as strong leaders, have to do the same thing. Because if they talk over their teams, right, which is the potential, right, that's the propensity, is to be talking, then the teams won't necessarily feel heard. So I think on both sides, you got to come closer to the middle. So as a leader who's an introvert, I need to put myself out there and engage people and bring them into the conversation. And my extroverted leader peers need to slow the roll and get the input from the quieter parts of the team. And I think the best leaders find a way to do both.
I think that's super interesting because, of course, the webinar that I did a few weeks ago with the SMTA was about asking better questions, but also becoming a better listener, right? So,
I think that inherently introverts are better listeners, just because that's how we think through and process and reflect. But there's so many skills to being a good leader. That's just one. Right. And so for my extroverted peers might learn something from that, whereas I'm not the one that says, hey, let's do a Zoom meeting with party hats. Like, that just doesn't even cross my radar. But it's fun for people and for teams. So I have things to learn to make for more fun and energy and you know, camaraderie, especially in a time when everybody's working from home.
do you think that the working from home is easier for someone who has an introverted temperament?
I think it depends. I mean, I love working from home, but I have an extroverted partner and 2 dogs. So the fact that I'm on a meeting with a video and they're hanging up clothes in the closet behind me and the dogs are running through, I think it affects me just as much as anybody else. But I think that for folks who get energy from others, things like this, where you get to see other people and have a dialogue, I think that really helps people get that recharge, right? The number of Zoom cocktail parties I've attended in the last 8 weeks is probably surpassed anything I ever thought was even imaginable. But it's a way to connect with people and get that recharge.
So I think that what I'm hearing you say is really also that that actually being an introvert can give you an edge as a leader in some situations.
I think it can, and I think that when no matter, right, there's a spectrum of everything. As a prep for this, I asked my team a couple of weeks ago when Karyn and I were talking, I said, how many of you would identify as an introvert or an extrovert? And one of my folks who I would have thought would have been more of an introvert, she's like, I'm an omnivert. I said, I don't even know what that is, but I could, I could guess. But what she was saying is she finds herself kind of in the middle. She loves people, she likes being with people, but she needs quiet, reflective time too. So I think there's a spectrum, right? The bell-shaped curve we're all so familiar with. And I don't think it's ever good or healthy to be way out on the other end of either end, right? But to recognize where you are and then how to move yourself and encourage people to move themselves so that everybody gets what they need.
As you've, worked on different things and you've moved through the, I guess, ranks of leadership over the year, what do you think that some of the biggest challenges have been for you, knowing that you have an introverted temperament?
I would say finding an appropriate way to get my voice in the room quickly enough. Right? A lot of times everything's very fast paced. And if you need longer time to reflect and think, you may not always get it. So finding those ways to help myself get in there early enough so that the voice gets heard. On the other hand, as a leader, I try to do a whole variety of things with my team. Whether we're doing, chatting in comments during a meeting like what we can do here, right? That lets somebody who you could chat in now something you just thought of based on a conversation we had 10 minutes ago. And that allows people to participate differently, right? Because you don't have to in the moment ask your question or make your point. If you make it clear from the beginning that as we're doing something or having a conversation or working a problem, just chat in an idea or a thought you've got. It lets you engage people in whatever way they want to be engaged. And I find that that's really, really helpful.
Do you have any advice for other people who are introverts and who are working on moving their way up in leadership? Do you have any advice for them about how they could use their introversionist strengths to do that?
I would say clearly, be yourself. Be who you are, and find a way that works for you to let you get your voice in the room. I think early on, some of the things I did is I might raise my hand to take on a project, and then by taking on a project, right, that lets you step away, think about it, synthesize your thoughts, and then bring that back. And it demonstrates a proficiency with the topic and with meeting deadlines and all those other things that are great attributes of individual contributors as well as leaders, but then working with a team and bringing a team result back. It doesn't always have to be in the moment, and it lets you find your way for how you work with groups and then represent yourself to other leaders. I'd also say if you're trying to work your way up in a particular organization, find a leader that you really like and respect, and then ask them if they would be willing to mentor you. It doesn't matter whether they're an introvert or an extrovert. It matters that you like and respect them and value how they operate, and let them help you. I had tremendous help from people, other introverted leaders and other extroverted leaders that helped me find ways to navigate.
And then, of course, you passed all those ways on because you've given help to many, 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 many people, including me.
I have, and for me, right, that's where the process improvement stuff and the lean being about people, that's where it all comes back together. So it's really the heart of the organization are the people, and finding a way to help everybody who's part of the organization be the best that they can be in whatever way. That for me is my charter as their leader and as someone who's bringing to bear the thinking of how to drive productivity, efficiency, effectiveness through people in the business.
Mm-hmm. Were there any times that you just felt that it was difficult for your organization to see and value you as a leader because of stereotypes that people might have about introverts?
I would say less in the last, few years. I had a boss who I just adored, just a wonderful, wonderful human being at another company. And he was an extrovert's extrovert and never met a piece of information he could retain. Like he was ADHD in whatever kind of stereotypical way you want to find it. And what the effect it had on me was his inability to characterize the work that I was doing. So he knew what I was doing. He trusted me to do it. But to the leaders of the leaders, he was completely incapable of helping them understand the value we brought. So that affected me in the organization and my team in terms of the amount of respect we got. And honestly, I was not successful there in figuring out how to unlock that so it didn't happen again in that company, because sometimes your fate has been sealed. But in my new company, I have found many ways to help my less data-driven leaders, my more extroverted leaders, through written comments, right, or short notes. They don't want to read 6 paragraphs. If I give them 6 paragraphs, they're going to read the first 3 sentences and be done. So by altering my style to give them information in a way they consume it and can reiterate it, has been a real blessing for me and for my team in terms of getting the work that we're doing advanced by folks who think that way. They think in sound bites.
And actually it's something that you taught me how to do that actually I use all of the time, right? Because as the extrovert, I could just go on and on and on and on too, but maybe that's too much for people as well, right? And really how to be a better listener. So as a leader, how have you helped your organization see the value of introverts?
So I would say, and I don't spend a lot of time with my team talking about, right, the introvert versus the extrovert, but from a process perspective, I try and vary my style. So one example I have is we're doing a part of our individual development plans. We do a book club with my direct team, which, trust me, none of my extroverts wanted to read a book, but I got them all doing it. So we chunk it into paragraphs or into chapters, and I assign 2 people together to do the chapter. They can teach it back any way they want, and then we have dialogue. So what I've done is, right, we have time to read, which gives my introverts time to reflect. We have a teach back, which is focused for them. So whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, this is their time to put the voice in the room. And then we take questions and share thoughts and ideas around where we've seen these various pieces of information materialized in the business. So I try and vary the style of how we do work. So we don't just everybody get together and talk, but we have quiet time, reflection time, teaching time. And then when I start my next meeting, when we go back to it, I'll say, does anybody have anything they learned from, they've thought of since we last talked 2 weeks ago? So I bring my introverts an opportunity back in at the beginning of the conversation to talk again. It doesn't always work. Like projects run faster than that sometimes, and that's not one of the options that you've got. But anytime I have an option to set a process up, I'll set it up so it works for everybody.
This is really making me think a lot. And it's actually giving me a question because I know you and you're an incredibly thoughtful person and a fabulous leader. And so what I'm thinking about is, because you come from that introverted position, are you thinking about, is it helping you really to think about how to include everyone? Because you might come from the temperament that maybe we're used to more extroverts than introverts in leadership. And I think that's a real strength that you're thinking how to bring everybody along in a very purposeful way, right? That we're not just going to have things in one style, because maybe you've also found that it's not very fun to be in an organization where people don't bring your style along, right?
Right, and I will say, in the process improvement world, I spend so much time in team meetings and running team meetings, right? Running Kaizen events. Those are like just draining, exhaustive, because you're working fast and it's all about talking to people and learning things and trying things and changing things. But even at that, I'll usually try and find a way to say we're looking at brainstorming what a possible root cause might be, right? One time we'll brainstorm and everybody talks all at once, and anybody can talk any way they want, and we'll write it all down. The next time we do something like that with the group, we'll say, all right, what I'm going to do is we're going to go around the room. So first, everybody take 3 Post-it notes, write down 3 ideas you've got, and then we're going to start in the front and we're going to work our way around to the back, and everybody's going to give one. If you don't have one or somebody's already given yours, say pass. And that way, my friend that's in the back corner isn't trying to figure out how to get their voice in. And it's not a surprise when you call on them, because they know it's coming. So they get their heads around it. And it meets the needs of all the different parties. And then at the end, it's like, does anybody have anything left? And invariably, my extroverts will have more ideas that they've thought of, right? Because their brains are moving. And sometimes my introverts will too. But I try and vary how I work the room and how I ask people to do things, so that everybody gets a chance to be who they are, and we get the best ideas from the teams.
So if people aren't as lucky to be in an organization where they have a leader who's as thoughtful as you are, and perhaps their strengths and what they can add as an introvert aren't being called upon and called forward, and they don't have someone who's really making sure that their voice is heard too, what can people do?
Well, pardon the lawnmower. They're mowing the lawn across the driveway. You have to be brave, but I have found that if I talk to a leader, if I trust them, if I say to them, right, I work better if I have a few minutes to give some thought to something. Or they'll say, can you do this for me? And I'll say, yes, but can I get it to you tomorrow? And negotiate a little bit. Or if you've even, if you've had experiences, right, we all have different life experiences, many more the more places we've worked, suggesting to your manager or to whoever's running the team, could we try something like this? Because I don't always see everybody getting a chance to participate. How would you feel if we did this? You have to be comfortable that you can do that with the leader, but advocate for yourself. Tell them what you need, or advocate if you're comfortable for it for the breadth of your team, because invariably everybody's going to have a different way of showing up and a different way of getting their thoughts into the room. And the more variety you use, the better you're going to get. But you have to get comfortable to be able to ask for that. And usually your boss or your boss's boss well enough to know how well that's going to be received. If you've got a terrible boss who wouldn't receive that well, I suggest you look elsewhere anyway. But if you've got a boss who's just maybe not recognizing it, having that conversation can be really beneficial.
Maybe also ask in writing.
There we go. So you have a chance to put your thoughts down on paper and say it just the way you want to say it.
Yeah.
Right.
How did you find out you were an introvert? Did any of the organizations you have had personality testing or those kinds of things?
Really long time ago, and I will tell you, it pains me what happened to poor Eastman Kodak Company. But when I was there in the heyday, what a phenomenal place it was to be, and they were very much on the leading edge of bringing in leadership and leadership styles. So that was my first place I took a Myers-Briggs, and the Myers-Briggs came back and identified on the spectrum that I was an introvert, let's see, INTJ. So I was an introverted thinking, judging person, which is kind of an odd. Usually it's extroverts that end up on the judging, but it was a kind of a mixed model. But that was the first time I learned about introverts versus extroverts in terms of attributes that you had, and the great thinking of how do you use that knowledge to get the most out of your team by making sure everybody finds a way to get themselves heard and their ideas in.
Because I'm wondering also if that would be a way. I didn't work in any organizations that had Myers-Briggs. I've taken it on my own, so I know my own. I'm not ENTJ, right? But I think that maybe some of those things in organizations have gone out of style or fallen out of fashion or been replaced by other things. So I think it might also be a good strategy to ask your organization if you could have learning along those lines, right? Or do some of those kind of things so that we could all learn better to understand each other's styles and work and get along with each other's styles.
Absolutely. And there's another one, Strengths Finders, that's out there that goes into, I believe, a little bit more detail. It's not so much about introversion or extroversion, but it helps you understand where your key strengths are and maybe where your opportunities are. So as you're, again, partnering up with people and working together, that you can put folks together on a team that bring a broader spectrum of strengths, so people can learn from each other just inherently by working together on a project.
Yes. And I have one more question before we'll take some questions from everybody who's on the call. So my question is, what suggestion do you have for us extroverts to make things easier? Because I'm sure my constant gesticulating and talking, and I probably send you like 1,000 text messages a day, because if I'm not talking by talking, I'm talking in some other way. How can we help? How can extroverts help introverts?
I would say extroverts can help introverts just by taking a breath, right? Just like introverts can help make sure that extroverts feel heard, right? So I think just taking a pause, being cognizant, and saying, you know, I've been talking, I haven't heard from Leslie, or I haven't heard from Tom, or I haven't heard from Don, and remembering to ask them, whether, again, it's in writing or it's in, a public forum like a conference call or something, just remembering to make sure everybody gets a chance to be heard and knows that they're going to be asked for their input, I think goes just tremendously far in terms of helping people feel engaged.
And I'm going to say, I, as an introvert, I always try to look, because I can see sometimes when I'm going to push you over the edge, right, with my talking.
I seem to remember a conversation years ago in the car when we were slightly lost and before GPS was particularly helpful. And I was trying to think, and you were talking constantly. And I think I said something that said, could you please just be quiet for one moment until I figure out what we're doing? Because I couldn't take the chatter.
Yes.
But when you can say that to your friend, to your boss, to your team, like, hey, this is for me, you're not doing anything wrong, but for me, I need this. I need two minutes of quiet, and then we're good to go. That is a great thing to be able to do, and really it brings the best out in people, and it makes for a really super respectful team.
I think so too. So Leslie, first of all, thank you for sharing all this with us. I'm going to open this up for people's questions. If you have a question, just put your name and type your question. She's
going to say, shout it out.
Please type your question in the chat, and then I'll call your name, and you can go off mute and ask your question.
I think there is one question already in the chat box from Diana.
Cool. Diana, can you go off mute and just ask your question? Tell us a little more.
Hi, my name is Diana. I want to ask, sometimes our workplace environment is very sensitive to like harassment or discriminations. So when you try to show you care for your coworkers, how to approach that? Not to be considered as a form of you know, favorism or other things.
That's an interesting one. I personally find that if I'm considerate and thoughtful and reach out to people to get their input, that even if there's dynamics sometimes in a work environment that people are overly sensitive or overly insensitive, because both can happen, right? But if you're considerate and thoughtful in how you ask people, and I personally have not found a lot of trouble. Karyn, I don't know if you've had different experiences.
No, I think actually for me, one of those questions also is around setting group norms or team norms. And so I actually, on the other end of the spectrum, tend to be, well, not in the coronavirus times, but a very huggy person. And so, you know, because I'm with that extroverted personality, so I try to tend to ask people also in our norms of how we're going to work together as a team, how we work together as an organization, let's all come to a discussion about what's okay and what's not okay, right? Do we shake hands? Do we say, you know, namaste or bow or all of those kind of things? And I think, again, that upfront discussion can really help. And then everybody knows what and can see. We can use our good lean thinking, right? We can write it down, can see what those standards are. Does that help, Diana?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Maria Encarnacion, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I see that you have a question. Will you come off mute and ask your question, please?
Hi, and you did it right. Very few people pronounce my last name correctly.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, what do you call someone who is a combination of both, introvert and extrovert? I've been a leader almost all my life, whether it was in church, at my job, I'm on a management position, so, but I am a combination of both. So what do you call that?
Well, I told you my one employee called it an omnivert, but I think that we don't have to actually classify ourselves into a category. I think all of us have some of all of the attributes, and it just matter. If you're blessed to have a strength in both, then you have less work to do than those of us that are out further on the spectrum trying to come to the middle and recognize it. But that's the only term I've ever heard used. I don't even know if it's accurate. But I do believe everybody's got attributes of both characteristic sets, and it's just which ones are a little bit stronger.
Cool. Does that help, Maria?
Yes, thank you.
Certainly.
So I'm blessed.
You are blessed.
Yeah, so you're gonna be the next webinar, okay?
Oh, wow, thank you. Anytime.
Cool. All right, any other questions from anybody else or any comments that you'd like to add?
Looks like Jessica has a question here.
Oh, Jessica. Jessica, a step. Come off mute, please. All right, I don't hear Jessica, so I'm going to read the question. What tools do you think work best to strengthen the respect of your leadership role? How do you move from friend to leader?
Whoa, that's a good one. I would say for me, because I have been very lucky to have some leaders, right, people that I worked directly for that were friends as well. We always would go with the rule, right? Friends is friends and business is business.
You've said that to me so many times, Leslie.
Right, and so if it's a business decision, then it's a business decision, and my own personal feelings of friendship or right, it just has to be set aside. Not that you can't be friendly at business, but you have to make business calls, hard calls, for the right reasons. And sometimes that means you have to set the friendship aside, not because you don't want to be good friends, but because you really have to be diligent in taking care of all of your team and your business and your customers and make the right decision. If you do that, and when you do that, I've never had it negatively affect my friendship. I think it actually strengthens it.
Yes, and I really can say, because Leslie and I have worked together in various different situations, and of course we're friends, and now she's one of the directors of my foundation, and I'm actually the president of the foundation. So the role is kind of flip-flopped, and I think that we've always thought about that, right? Friends is friends and business is business, and a business decision isn't going to affect our friendship and our, I'm not going to favor Leslie over someone else when it comes to a business decision. But I think, again, that really goes to the setting the expectations up front, right? So I actually think we don't do that enough as people or as leaders, and say, this is the expectation, this is the standard, this is the norm that we're all going to work with, and then make it visible. I think we'd solve a lot of problems if we actually did that up front.
And we introverts will write it down for you extroverts so that we have a record.
I'm already talking it through, aren't I?
Yes, you are. I just want to go back because I, of course, went and looked this up. An omnivert, O-M-N-I-V-E-R-T, is someone who displays classic traits of both introverts and extroverts in specific situations. Turns out, right, it turns out that personality types are also on a spectrum. So I think that all the different thoughts we had as we talked through this would line up with that.
I think that's totally cool. And I think that's part of your totally fabulous, good introverted leadership, that while I'm talking wildly and processing something, you're actually looking up the real information that someone asked for.
And this is why extroverts and introverts in combination make good leaders, good team members, right? Good teammates.
And good people living in the world together, because no matter who we are, no matter where we live, no matter what our innate temperament that we come into this world with, we all have to learn to work together, right? And live together in harmony. If people have any questions that they want to reach out to you afterwards, how can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. And you're welcome to friend me if that's something you're interested in. Or let's see, Karyn, would they have your information at Karyn Ross Consulting?
I will give people my information. Yep. And
Okay.
Karyn Ross Consulting. Yep.
Yep, that's perfect. And they can have my my personal email address, which you're welcome to share with them as well. And if people want to reach out or they've got a question, part of why I do what it is that I do is I get an opportunity to interact and meet and help people all across the world. So I'd be more than delighted to talk to anybody.
Cool. And so if you want to reach out to either Leslie or I, you can find me at Karyn, Karyn, at KarynRossConsulting.com. Leslie and I, as I said, work together and are friends all the time. We're happy to help in any way. So if you have any further questions or need further help, please do. reach out and we will be there to help you. I'll be talking mildly. All right, Carly, do you have anything you'd like to add to close this meeting?
Again, thank you, Karyn and Leslie. This was amazing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody. It was a blast. I appreciate being included.